Rob, are you just willing to just, it can go anywhere as long as it's not in your community?
You know, my position on power plants is they should be as safe as possible and as clean as possible. And when I met with Ford and TransCanada when this started, Ford almost agreed to those conditions, and TransCanada put up their hand right in my own boardroom and said, wait a minute, this is Ontario. We don't have to do that here. And what's proposed in Nanticoke by the gas-fired power plant people down there is actually not only safer because it's further away from people, it's cleaner than what TransCanada sees fit to put into this crowded airshed that's already stressed and overpolluted. So for me, it comes down to a simple matter of what kind of Ontario do you want to live in? Do you want to live in an Ontario where a company like TransCanada can walk in and build something that they wouldn't be allowed to build in the United States of America, for example? I mean, the last 103 gas-fired power plants built under President George Bush in the United States of America were cleaner, at least 33% cleaner, some even more cleaner, than what TransCanada is trying to palm off on Toronto. And I got to tell you, everybody, no matter where you live, you have a stake in this because this is not the last power plant that the government's going to need to build. And if we don't draw the line somewhere and say they need to be safe and clean, then everybody's going to get one eventually. It's just a matter of time. So you may think, oh, well, it's only them. But when they come for you, I hope that you'll realize then, when the gas power plant comes to your neighborhood, and it's not as clean as they build in the United States, it's whatever they can get away with here. I hope you're happy. I think that what we need to do is we all need to give our heads a shake and pay attention to the fact that we have some of the most laughably lax standards around the environment in the world.
It just seems to have his mind made up, doesn't it?
I've had the impression that the government has its mind made up. I've had the impression that they haven't looked at all the facts. I continue to invite them to come out and look and see for themselves. You know, as a mayor, you're at the top of a apparatus of an organization of hundreds of people. As a premier or a minister, you're at the top of an organization of thousands and tens of thousands. But there comes a point where you've got to go check what they're telling you. You've got to go see for yourself. And if they would do that, I think they would see how crazy this is.
What do you think your odds are winning this thing?
Well, one of my best character features is I'm an undying optimist. I'm sure that they're going to do the right thing because we're not going to let up. We're going to continue to try to draw their attention to this until they finally see the mistake that they're making.
Are there other questions? Your name and affiliation, please.
My name is Noor David. I'm a reporter with the Toronto Star. From what I understand, the plant at Oakville would only be operational 40% of the time once it's running. Has there been any kind of environmental assessment to compare, the environmental kind of fallout, or to see if the one in Oakville would be worse than the one in Haldimand County, if it's pumping and running more and producing more energy? Like, has there been a comparison at all of that?
No, in Ontario's terrible system, the Power Authority doesn't look at things like that. The proponent does the evaluation and sends their self-conducted evaluation to the Ministry of the Environment and says, we've looked at it and we're sure it's okay, and so give us a certificate of approval to pollute the air. That's our Ontario system. And when they do that, which will be sometime later this year, we will have a brief window of opportunity to appeal to the minister to ask yet again for an individual environmental assessment.
Because it just seems like this one will be running 40% of the time, only when it's needed, whereas the one in Haldimand County would be running all the time and producing 1,000 more watts of energy. So it just seems like, are we talking about the same thing? Because this is going to be, it would be a peak, or, a plant that would only be used in peak moments in Oakville versus one that's going to be used all the time. Like, it's not really, it doesn't look to us as it's the same thing.
Well, one of the things that you have to look at is what do you give permission for? They're not asking for, nor is the government promising to give permission to only operate 40% of the time. They're actually giving them permission to operate all of the time. And they're giving them a contract that permits them to operate up to all of the time. So in those circumstances, I think you have to take the conservative, cautious point of view that it could operate full-time. You know, there's been, I mean, and I have asked them directly, are you going to limit them to 40% of the time? And the answer is, well, no.
And
There's actually a condition with these plants, where they're talking about running them now like every day, once or twice a day for 5 days. In fact, the startup and shutdown has significantly higher emissions than running stable state, and that's not taken into account in any of this either. So it's actually a worse situation than if you were running steady state.
In fact, in your own, in Toronto at the Portlands, it's been discovered that the emissions during startup and shutdown are like 1,000 times higher than were estimated when they got their certificate of approval. It's the same company, TransCanada. And I'm suggesting to you that this goes to the very credibility of the corporation. They represented to the Ministry of the Environment that it would be cleaner than it turned out to be, and only by like thousands of times. And there's a citizen group in the area of the Portlands plant that's trying to get attention for this this contradiction between what they said they would do and what they are doing.
And one of our options, the environmental assessment is nearly completed, and the statement of completion is to be filed shortly. And then OPG is already our existing plant, which has been going since the late 60s.
The alternative in Nanticoke is better by far, and what's ironic about it is the Ontario Power Authority's own plans acknowledge that it's actually cheaper to bring the power in from Nanticoke.
Question, please.
Today. It's been my understanding that you've said, in a little less on an informal basis, that you would prefer to have the plant, or you would like the plant in Haldeman. Is this more of your informal announcement of this, or a more formal announcement?
No, we have been pushing that for some time now. The one option has been working with us for over 3 years. Council has approved it in principle. They have 200 acres purchased, and you would use about 30 acres for the plant, and the rest of the property would be farmed. Now our OPG site has 8 units, which they could convert to biomass or gas, or a combination of the two. So we have the option that they have the land. There's an extra 4,500 acres sitting there with the 3 kilometers buffer zone. I have to keep stressing that. That's a way, you know, the buffer zone is just second to none. Plus the corridor, which is, say, it's 4 towers wide, and there's room for 2 more in that corridor. To get now, to go through a community and get a corridor that wide, it's just would be almost impossible. We have so much out there, and there's rail access and water access. We've got it all. Why not come to Haldeman County?
Do we know